Hello, podcast world, and welcome to the Beers with Engineers podcast, where we have a pint of fun and a shot of geek. My name is Bert Ushel, and this is episode number 26, whose title is What Makes an Engineer? When this episode releases, it will be the 1-year anniversary of my first episode. Yay! For this special occasion, my guest on this episode is Doug Tyger. What can I say about Doug? Quite a bit, actually. We met as roommates as co-ops in Cincinnati, and then lived together again after we graduated. We quit our first jobs at about the same time and spent about 10 days going to baseball games across the Northeast. I was at his wedding, he was my best man, we were godparents to each other's children. We probably know things about each other that our wives don't know. Oh yeah, and he is an engineer. Or at least he was at one time. Or was he, or is he? That is part of our discussion and what inspired the title. When Doug and I first talked about him being a guest months ago, he observed it would take a lot more than the typical hour. So you can expect that Doug will be a recurring guest. Before we commence, a quick plug. Please check out my website, dexterityeng.com, to learn more about me and how I can help you develop your product. More importantly, go there and download a screenshot of my alt code card. If you don't know what that is, more the reason to go there and find out. If you're an engineer, I guarantee you will find it useful. Enough said. Here's Doug. Good day to everyone. I have been waiting a long time for the stars to align properly and have this interview. Therefore, I am very pleased to introduce to everyone my very good friend, Doug Tyger. How are you this morning, Doug?
Good morning, Bert. I'm well.
Good. And I hear you this time. This is our second go-round of this introduction. Doug is actually in a hotel lobby somewhere in California where it is about 5:30 in the a.m. He is there visiting his first grandchild. That's a very common thing with my guests this year, lots of first grandchildren. And given the time, he might be the first grandfather on record to be sleeping less than his granddaughter's parents. As I introduced Doug to you, one of my favorite stories is how we were introduced or met each other. Simply put, I came home from work one day and he was sleeping in my spare bedroom, which is 100% true, but not true 100%. I was in the company apartment as a co-op and I knew he was coming, but that's not nearly as interesting as saying I discovered him in my spare bedroom. So in the almost 40 years since we've met, our careers have been pretty different. All of my jobs have been as an engineer. As I alluded to in the podcast introduction, not the case for Doug. He started as an engineer and quickly went down the management path. He is now the owner of Integral Manufacturing in Southwest Ohio. The company is 3 companies that make their own tooling, do metal stamping, injection molding, related secondary operations. That should be fairly accurate. I just stole it from your website. We will give contact information later on and in the notes. You will learn more about Doug soon, which is what we do on this podcast. But let's get to the first question of the podcast. Maybe not so much a question, but please tell me you are not, in fact, having a beer at 5:30 in the morning, or if you are, it's just a continuation from last night. What is the beverage status?
Water this morning, although I am a beer drinker, 1 or 2 a week. I'm not a huge beer drinker, but not this early in the morning. So I'll stick with water, and I've already had a coffee.
All right, fair enough. All right. Do you have next item on the agenda? Do you have a joke to share with us?
I do. I have a metallurgical engineer joke, but it's kind of tough. Oh, hold on. I have a corrosion engineering joke. Never mind. It's too salty. Wait, since you're a mechanical engineer, Bert, I have a mechanical engineer joke. Never mind. It's too strained.
The geek levels are they're up to 11, I think. Which just carries on very well from last week. The joke was a beam went into a bar. Bartender says, "Can I get you something?" He says, "Give me a moment." So,
yeah, I heard that.
We are continuing on the very geeky engineering line. All right, hey, but this is what we do here. All right, so now that we've got that out of the way, a little bit your background. How did you become an engineer, or why you were an engineer? Any interesting stories leading to that path in your life?
You want to jump into how I was an engineer? Okay. I was proficient in math and science in high school and had no money, and therefore I went to engineering school because that was the discipline that gave you the best paying jobs. So that's really how I
Hmm.
chose to be an engineer is basic economics, if you will. I could do it, and it would lead to a job. And you remember in the mid '80s, Bert, we're talking like the old
Yeah,
timers
yeah,
we are. Jobs were pretty scarce, so you wanted to find something that could get you
yeah.
going. The the reason I chose materials engineering was that I couldn't decide which discipline really was best to pursue. Went to an introduction to engineering class where we covered everything, and the one common ground for most of the engineering programs was that materials were one of the limiting factors.
Sure.
So I thought, I'll play my odds and be a materials engineer. That way I can work with just about
That makes
anybody other than the software
right, right.
engineers.
Okay. I'm not sure I knew that about you. I That's interesting. So that was an intro to engineering class in college. So you had declared
In
engineering,
college,
but not a specific branch of engineering.
I might have declared civil engineering,
Okay.
but no particular affinity toward that. I had to fill in a
Sure.
box.
Sure.
Yeah, so that was the rationale, and I got to tell you, it's true.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You really do touch just about any discipline. You can really be a factor in any engineering
Yep.
discussion. Just don't ask me to tolerance something. It's not going to
Right.
happen well.
Right. No, I mean we all have our strengths and weaknesses, and we all work together, and we get the job done. All right. So your first job, well, your first co-op, which is where we met, was at Procter and Gamble, working in was it a material science group? What was the name of that group?
Yeah, it was a materials
Okay.
engineering group indeed, and really a fascinating group in that all of the new and improved products for a consumer products business were evaluated for their manufacturability, and our lab did the corrosion
Right.
engineering. So we would look at a process and from start to finish, identify the materials and make sure that a change in formula wouldn't result in some piece of equipment failing. And without going into too much detail, my first actual road trip was to a facility where a concentrated, new and improved formula had been introduced to the marketplace, but they had bypassed the corrosion engineering evaluation. Lo and behold,
Oops.
they ate up their primary mix tank. So I went and spent all day inside a huge mix tank looking at all of the corrosion that had occurred, and it was basically non-functional.
Now was it the same formula just concentrated?
I think this is almost 40
Yep.
years ago, but I think they had an acid addition.
Okay.
Maybe either the concentration of acid had changed or the type of acid had changed, and it was a stainless steel mix tank, beautiful, couple of stories
Yep.
high, pitted and corroded to the point of really no use.
That that ruined
Ouch.
somebody's day.
Yeah. No, I was a co-op and I didn't get involved in all of the
Right.
other
Right.
things. I just went up and they told me to climb a ladder and measure this and then go over there and record that
Yeah. So
and so forth. Like a good co-op
yep.
would
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. I mean, just for the record, it was Procter and Gamble where we were both working as co-op. So it could have been shampoo or Scope or any of a bunch of other products that Procter and Gamble worked on then. And yeah, somebody. I'm guessing somebody just said, "Yeah, it's just the same thing that concentrated. We did the test, X years ago, and it worked fine. So we'll just do the same thing again." And was not the case, obviously.
One of my favorite journeys from that time was to Tennessee where they fried Pringles potato chips.
Oh, really?
and and at the time, I have no idea how they do it now. They would lay an individual chip on a saddle that's shaped like a
Right.
Pringles, and they would travel individually into a fryer
Just
and a dryer,
okay.
and they would come out. The saddle would release the potato chip, and there was a gathering device that would pull them together and stack them into the Pringles cans.
And so imagine.
And they actually had a fatigue failure in the conveyor
Okay.
system, so they wrecked the line. And I went down and isolated what happened and did all the work on it as a co-op. It was kind of a cool job to go down and figure out what
Yep.
happened and tell them how to fix their conveyor line.
Yeah, I mean, my experience at P&G was they gave the co-ops a fair amount of latitude and responsibility. Obviously we were being watched closely, but in my experience, it sounds like your experience, we were treated very much like engineers.
There was always good guidance, as you say. I mean, I had some great mentors
Yep.
there who I would sit down and describe my problem, and they were very good at teaching us, teaching me what the principles were. That group actually had a library that dated back to the early 1900s. I can't remember which product, but it was probably Ivory
Right.
soap or
Right.
something like that. They had investigation reports numerically ordered.
Hmm.
And so I went back and read investigation report number one, which I think had to do with fatty acids
All right.
and ivory soap or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I think it was a co op session. I was in the Ivorydale plant where they made ivory and other things. And, they had what do you call it? The cabinet with drawings. And back in the old day, before CAD, things were actually drawn. And I glanced through that a little bit and found some drawings from like I think it was the late 1920s. Probably vellum of some sort and either pencil or ink. I don't remember, but that was it's like, hey, my parents were just born at this time. But no, it's funny as you're saying that, and as we will move into your non-engineering career, I left Procter and Gamble largely because while I was titled as an engineer, I was doing mostly project management, which did not interest me a whole ton. So I left the project management world at P&G to become an engineer somewhere else, where you were doing much more, I'm not saying necessarily hardcore, but definitely engineering work at Procter and Gamble. I think your next job was still engineering, but eventually on the path towards not engineering.
When I joined P&G full time, they had a pulp making division, literally cutting down trees, grinding them up, and turning them into pulp for facial tissues and
The
so forth and so
toilet
on.
paper, diapers.
It was a raw material, and I learned how to make pulp. Actually, the stinky pulp mills that smell like sulfur. Yeah, I would do that, and that was 100% engineering.
Right.
That's what we did, and I could have made a career of that, but like you said, I didn't necessarily think that was my future, and I happened to get a call from a local steel company. Being a metallurgical engineer, we're kind of a rare
Right.
breed, and they said, "Hey, why don't you come and interview with us?" And while I was early in my career at P&G, I said, "Okay, I'm willing to hear what you're up to." And basically, one of the aspects of that was really attractive was the president of the company was a metallurgist.
There you go.
I'm going to go on a limb and say there never has been a metallurgist that will be the president of Procter and Gamble, nor will there ever be. And so, what that said to me at the time as a young engineer was, I have
Yep.
options. I wasn't pigeonholed by any means. I love that company. I still live in Cincinnati, and a lot of my friends are at P&G. But I had options that were much broader than what I would have at P&G, for instance. So I decided to move
So
along,
pause, for
and
1 second. Options of a non-technical path or options, what was your thinking? Non-technical options or options within technical field?
If you could be the president of the company, you could function in just about any area
Okay,
of the
sure.
business. I mean, I think financial is a little too
Right.
specialized, but outside of that, the business was wide open. So if you, in my group, we had specialists that had done the same thing for 40 years. And as a 23 or 24-year old, that was a little
Hmm.
daunting. And so that just said to me, anything in the company is possible. So let's see what that would bring. I didn't think I'd stay there long. I didn't think I would be in the steel business very
Hmm.
long. That lasted for 19 years, so I guess we'll call that a decent commitment. So so that's really what was attractive. And my first job was actually as a technical support person for customers, and namely in automotive.
All right.
So cars were then and still are made mostly of steel, very technical applications, whether it's the selection of the grade or the formability of the part and how it's manufactured and put into a car, and even some corrosion engineering, which was my specialty then. All of that came together. And so I worked with car companies who needed steel resources to design and build their next generation of cars. So pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yep. Yeah, and as I recall, you were working on 2, 3, 4 year in the future models, not this year or next year's car models. Is that generally true?
Yes, it is. And back then, the cars were still being designed much by hand and much by trial and error. And not the vehicles themselves, CAD was established, but the formability of the parts, how to make a fender into the shape the design engineer wanted it, or more importantly, something in the structure, how to design that structure such that it would not fatigue
Right.
in service, or it would pass its crash
Hmm.
test. So back in those days, they needed a lot of steel to crash a lot of cars until they got it just right.
A lot of trial and error. Okay.
I'll just say this, that I was a witness to the transformation in the automotive industry from manufacturing really by hand and by art, and designing for crash by hand and by art, watching the finite element models evolve to the point where you can predict exactly how that part will form in a stamping
Yep.
die, and exactly how that vehicle will crash into a wall, so that when you run your actual government crash tests, you don't have a large number of vehicles. You don't have to go back to the drawing board. So they really compressed the design time. And I was a witness
Hmm.
to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember, and this is probably something, well, I remember you talked about it. There was bubble stampings or bubble grid drawings or something like that, where it was, I guess this is the prior FEA analysis and the trial and error, where you had the metal piece of metal, you'd put a bunch of circles on it, then you'd stamp it, and you look at the circles changing into ellipses, and that gave you information on the stretch and the draw and things like that, right?
Yes, part of the automotive business then, and it's evolved somewhat, but part of the automotive business then was to do just that, to electrically etch circles onto sheet metal, run it through the prototype die, not the final production
Right.
die, although that was done as well. And then the metallurgist, myself or others in my team, would literally read the circles and determine if they were being stretched too far and they would not form reliably in mass production. And they literally required the steel companies to, I'll call it buy off. We really didn't pay
Right.
anything, but
Sign off.
buy off.
Sign
Yeah,
off.
sign off is a better term. Sign off on the formability of the tool. So we followed tools all over the
Okay.
world. Wherever they were built, we went and tested it before the car company would buy the tool. Maybe it's a $300,000 tool or higher,
Sure.
and then they'd bring it back into production. But over time, they were able to simulate that, and they were able to turn it into more of a predictable
Yep.
machine.
Yep. All right. Very good. Let's digress a little bit. So one thing you said you wanted to talk about, and I know at least one or two other friends slash listeners have suggested this topic. What is an engineer? Look at the word, look at the word, but what is an engineer? So I did some exhaustive research and went to Wikipedia, and
Nice.
their definition of engineer I actually like pretty good. I will read it to you and the world. Engineers are professionals who invent, design, analyze, build, and test machines, complex systems, structures, gadgets, like they throw gadgets in there, and materials to fulfill functional objectives and requirements. And I think this is a key phrase while considering the limitations imposed by practicality, regulation, safety, and cost. And my initial reactions, I think that's a pretty good definition. I think they borrowed it from some engineering organization. And where are we here? The tiny bit of quibbling I would do is I might change. I'd add where we have a couple of ands. I say and or. An engineer doesn't necessarily invent, design, analyze, build, and test things. They will do one or two or three of those things. But I do think the definition is good enough to differentiate between an engineer and just a technician or a test technician and various other things. So, what are your thoughts on that definition?
I'm going to start with metallurgical engineering.
All right.
A metallurgical engineer can do many things with respect to the production of a various material. In this case, I'm going to use steel since that's my
Sure.
background. And metallurgical engineering starts with the making of steel, which is actually kind of like baking or cooking. And it's chemical reaction engineering, it's so forth. But in the end, you're not much different than a chef or a cook, and I mean that as somebody who loves
Yep.
food as a
Sure.
compliment. But is that engineering? And I sometimes think of engineers as people who are designing and building products as opposed to baking cakes, let's say. So that's one thing. It's just
Yep.
from what is. In fact, my degree is metallurgical engineering and material
Right.
science, which doesn't exist anymore. That's an outdated degree. It's now Carnegie Mellon, where I went to school. It's called materials science engineering.
Okay.
Let's pause on that for a minute. Material science engineering. Now, I'm not an academic. I don't know exactly what that means, but it to me convolutes science and engineering.
Yeah, those are
So I often want.
typically related but different subjects, and now you're joining them the two.
We have no problem in mechanical engineering. We do not have mechanical science engineers, do we?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
We do it actually in computer engineering. Aren't there computer science and computer science or computer engineering?
There's
Software
software
engineers.
engineering,
There's
computer
software.
science, yeah, and I've been told the differences between those, and I don't remember them, but
Here's what I know is that there's no professional engineering exam for metallurgists. There
there's
are
not.
for other
That's
engineers,
interesting.
and you can get a yeah. So you can get a PE and other things, but never never took a professional engineering. I don't stamp anything in that
Right.
world. But I think from my point of view, I'm certainly using engineering principles today, and I have for some time in my career on problem solving and so forth. But I don't invent, design, analyze, build, and test many machines, or so forth. Now I do complex systems. I'm a I run a business
Uh,
now,
Let
and
me pause you there.
people
I'm
systems
going to be
are.
rude and interrupt you there for a second.
Go right
Because
ahead.
when I was first reading that definition, as I recall, I was very pleased to see the word materials in there. And it is conspicuous in its absence of your most recent phrase. You did not mention materials as something engineers do, when that, in fact, was what you did as an engineer. Um, So it are you inventing, designing? Let's just back to my and or thing. Let's get rid of the ands and just the or of materials. Maybe you weren't inventing; you were designing, analyzing, building, and testing materials. So, by throwing of or into the definition, I would say that you were fitting the definition of an engineer. The material scientists, maybe you should call them material engineers. I'm not sure. Do fit that definition,
Materials can be patented.
right?
Material designs can absolutely be
Yep.
patented. Most of them are the materials in use today, at least on the metals side, have been in existence for a long time. There's not a lot of innovation. There is, but it's not necessarily easy to
Mm-hmm.
patent. But certainly
Oh
non-metallics,
yeah. Yep.
all types of patents happening every day. So, and so from that perspective, materials are engineered.
Right. Yep.
They
Absolutely.
absolutely are. So I guess I would say so I guess without going down a rabbit hole on this, materials are absolutely a candidate for engineering. They are engineered
Yep.
every day, and they are invented. They are designed. I had the privilege of working with some researchers that could think. You'd watch them. They could think microscopically in their
Mm.
head and design alloy systems in their head.
That's a talent or a skill or combination of the two.
Amazing. Well, let's see if we put in 1 part per million boron at this step in the rolling process. And you just sit there and say, "Oh my goodness,
That's like yeah.
that's not AI, that's real
Yeah,
I."
right, right. That's
Right?
that's I, big capital I.
So I think when you and I were have through the years actually, and today talk about the topic, I'm an engineer, I guess, but I don't do a lot of engineering.
Mm-hmm.
When we left P&G, you left to pursue engineering because that's what you've
That's
endeavored to
what I
be.
wanted. I wasn't doing engineering,
Yeah.
and then another job I left because they were doing some engineering but not enough, and so I joked that I wanted to work at a company for whom product development was not a hobby, and so I went to a company that product development was literally in the company's name.
And in my career, let's say, I've used engineering principles, but have not really engineered much.
Okay, sure, fair enough.
So I've engineered complex systems, but those are more people systems or supply chains. And so when we look at the the definitive source of engineer, which comes from Wikipedia, we laugh. I've engineered complex systems, certainly, engineered
Yep.
applications, helped people with applications, but really never sat down and said, I'm going to do something. And to me, that's an
Right.
engineer. But maybe that's limiting what the
Yeah. No,
definition is.
I'm intrigued by the recent focus on complex systems because that could be a very, very broad thing. And with not a lot of effort, we could not broaden the definition, but we could just tell somebody who's working on complex systems who would probably never think that they were an engineer that by this definition, you are an engineer. A supply chain system. And I don't think I know one of my previous guests. He was supply chain logistics, or he had a degree in supply chain. I'm not sure if it was engineering or not. I don't think it was, but supply chains are crazy complex systems. I don't think many of those people consider themselves engineers. Maybe they do, but that's interesting. So um, let me divert slightly. So I stayed on the engineering path. You did the more management path, which another tangent on the tangent was back in the 80s. I recall the dual path, maybe in the 90s. The dual path options for engineers was kind of a new thing. And I don't see it too much anymore, at least not explicitly in that way. But, anyways, I will return.
What do you mean by that? The dual path?
it as an engineer wanting a promotion, typically the promotion is to manager, director, vice president, that sort of thing. And where I remember it, the dual path, maybe just as well, where I remember it being very explicitly planned and executed was at my second job out of college, Ethicon, part of Johnson and Johnson, and they established a dual path. If you want to go into management, then you'll become a manager, director, and senior director, vice president, so on and so forth. They had a another path for engineers who wanted to continue, and it was, I forget all of them, but it was like engineer, senior engineer, principal engineer, and then like engineering fellow, then senior engineering fellow, and like distinguished engineering fellow. And some of the guys that I was working with 30 some years ago, I look them up on LinkedIn, and I'm seeing engineering fellow, distinguished engineering fellow, and I'm sure they have some small amount of management responsibilities. They're, instead of just being responsible for one part of a product, they're responsible for the entire product. And I would guess that the automotive companies have a similar dual path, because you have, this chief engineer is I believe, a commonly known used title at the engineering companies. So I don't know. I will pause on my soliloquy and let
So,
you respond any way you see fit.
so I ran AK Steel's research division for a number of years. The running joke I have with the people that I still talk to there is that they let me run it, but they wouldn't let me push any buttons.
Yeah, I remember you saying something to that effect before. That kind of surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't actually run any laboratory investigations. I didn't do anything. That wasn't my
Sure.
role. And we can talk about that because it folds into what you just
Yep.
mentioned. But the structure at the time, and it had been for decades, was that dual career path. So we had principal engineers, we had senior staff
Okay.
scientists or some such things, and they had a lot of authority. They didn't do the management piece, but they were the kind of people that could think
Right.
molecularly, and you'd literally pass by their office and they were sitting there, and they weren't typing at a computer or drawing something. They're just sitting there thinking, and maybe they were napping, but probably they were actually thinking
Oh yeah, I've yeah.
metallurgically. And then we had the management side, which ultimately you need that. So the principal engineers, without any type of business guidance, can become an ivory tower.
Mm. Yep.
And in fact, there was some concern that was happening when I was asked to go and lead that research department. Like, have we created an ivory tower? Do we have a group of big thinkers that are not serving the basic business? Maybe they're out there researching something that's going to transform the business, but how do we know?
Mm-hmm.
And so my role as an engineer that wasn't allowed to touch anything, but had a good nose for what the customers wanted, what the business needed, how manufacturing all folded together.
So one second.
My role
One
was,
second. These guys were engineers or scientists, or what would they were considered engineers?
we called them
Okay.
metallurgists.
Okay.
So I don't really didn't spend a lot of time on the engineering word per se.
Sure.
They were just our engine. We had a lot of
Okay.
metallurgists. A, a building, 100,000 square feet or whatever it was, that could make and roll steel,
Yep.
a little mini steel mill, and all kinds of fascinating innovations came out of that place. So my role was to take that, evaluate the talent level, and assure that that talent was aligned and capable of supporting the business. Turns out they were very capable. They understood the business well. And yeah, there was a couple things that had to stop and
Yeah.
a couple
Sure.
things that had to be kind of prioritized over other things.
Yeah. Evolutionary changes,
But
not revolutionary changes. Yeah.
yeah, but it was more of a communication issue with top management.
Okay.
Here's what's going
Yep.
on, and with customers and with the manufacturing plants themselves. So we were able to get everybody together, and we would do little road trips going to different plants and seeing customers and getting alignment. And and so that was really an enjoyable experience for me. And I think it was enjoyable for research because they ultimately, after I left, sometime after I left, but they ultimately remained aligned, were perceived as quite a valuable resource, and they got a brand spanking new research center.
Yeah.
It's it's like, it's an amazing facility. The company's been purchased by someone else, and they've kept it and expanded it, I think.
Yeah. I mean,
So
work is much more fulfilling when you see the purpose that it serves. And, it sounds like those guys were serving a purpose. The company wasn't completely sure. And you identified, yes, they are serving a purpose. Here's how we can even further improve that. Is that a fair summary?
and what it does is it goes back to your statement, wondering, are there still management and technical tracks? And I know as of 10 years ago there
Right,
were.
right,
I don't know if they've changed since then, but what we saw there was a combination of, okay, somebody like me who knows the technology at a certain level, but isn't the right one to do the basic and fundamental research and the deep thinking, but taking my skills and aligning them with the outside influences and encouraging them to train their brains on certain business
right.
needs. And really, it became quite a success to the point where they had a science fair at a board of directors meeting.
Really? Oh, that's
Unheard of.
cool.
We literally had the board of directors. It's a Fortune
Yep.
500 company. We had each of the major groups put on little booths to show to demonstrate to the board members what was going on in research, and then I gave a presentation on the forward-looking strategy for how research would function in the company for years to
Yeah.
come.
And I guarantee that's a
So
board meeting those board members will never forget. Many of them,
one of them was a former.
many are on multiple boards, and once a quarter they go, and yeah, a couple of memorable moments here or there, I'm sure, but I'm sure that one stands out for each and every one of them, just because that was so
It was a
different.
it was a pretty cool board.
Yeah.
I would go to some of the meetings, and one of them was the president of the Rand Corporation. So this was right down his alley, and the other was a woman who used to run the IRS and
Okay. A
completely
little
out of
different.
her world.
Yeah, but
So yeah, so pretty
if
diverse.
you're going to be on the board of a steel company, you got to understand the business, and I think you help them understand the business.
And so that technical and managerial track
Yep.
works, and I would hope that companies still do
Yep.
that.
All right. So this has been slightly planned, not completely though, but an excellent introduction to a question I've literally been wanting to ask you for years. And I remember you saying, earlier, geez, you're probably still in your 20s. That president of the steel company you mentioned, I think you said you're some sort of meeting with him, and one day he says, "Doug, someday I see you sitting in my chair," and you're not, but you got in that direction, and you've gone in a different direction, which is what you wanted to do, which is fine. And maybe candidly, tiny bit out of envy, but mostly out of curiosity. What was it that he saw in you as a mid-20s young engineer that he predicted that you could potentially be in that role as an executive?
So let's stay analytical here and not apply that to, let's say, me as an individual, but let's just
Sure.
stay analytical.
Okay.
First of all, he wasn't that far off. I ultimately became president of AK Steel International.
Okay. All right.
So and that was a decent sized division when we were done
Okay.
with it. So that wasn't his seat, but it was a
Yeah. I'm
president
not sure he meant
seat,
it
let's
literally, but
say.
yeah. Okay. So his prediction came pretty
Uh,
true.
and I'm president of my own company
Yep.
now, and many, while the scale is different, the aspects of the job are pretty similar. Other than I don't have to manage Wall Street, thank goodness.
Right.
But when you think about that, I don't know what was on his mind. I don't know what he saw. All I can say is what I see in other people. And at the risk of being offensive, and I don't really mean it that
Sure.
way, but let's think about the old cartoons, the Sunday comics, and they have cartoon characters, and occasionally some would have a light bulb above their head.
Hmm.
Others would have a question mark. Others would have like a little wisp. And I frankly look for people that have light bulbs above their head. The lights are on,
Hmm.
right? Not necessarily like I have an idea, but that person has a light bulb on above their head. Their lights are on. They understand the program. They're, they may not have everything lined up yet. They're still developing. The ones with a question mark, you say, are they? Is it possible to train them? Is it possible to really develop them, or are they really operating in a limited scope? Could be still quite of value,
Yep.
but not necessarily somebody that's going to rise to a leadership position. And then there's the ones with the wispy thing above them that I think back in the day you might call a dingbat or
Oh,
something.
yeah.
Just somebody that is beyond even a question mark. Just doesn't belong. And and I don't know if that's a great analogy, Bert, but I maybe I walked in and had a light bulb on above my
Hmm.
head, but that doesn't explain the whole thing because an engineer can have a light bulb on above their head, can be fantastic in everything they do, but not necessarily be projected to lead a
Right.
business.
Right. Okay.
So to that point, I guess there is the exclamation point. And so, for instance, you have an exclamation point above your head, and a light bulb, by the way, but an exclamation point. You and I've known you for all these
Right.
years, and others like you. Given an opportunity, you take that exclamation. You finish your work with an exclamation point. So maybe the cartoon analogy doesn't work
Hmm.
perfectly, but maybe that
Yep.
helps. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Um, that sounds pretty good. I do want to. This is just something I've thought of this in the last couple of weeks. Go back to the question mark, and I want to not denigrate the question mark. Not that you denigrated it, but let me go this direction. So I've actually thought of doing a blog post or something like that. But anyway, so if you have a choice between hiring a consultant who promises to answer all your questions versus a consultant who's going to give you new questions to ask, which one do you want? And you don't want an all or you don't want an all or nothing sort of situation there or in many places. But if you had a consultant come in and answer all your questions, that is very valuable, absolutely. But a consultant who maybe can't answer all your questions, but will give you two or three or four new questions that you need to ask is also very valuable. So having that question mark in your head is good. Depending on obviously depends on types of questions.
So maybe one question. There's two different types of question marks. One is you're clueless, and the other one is you're
Right,
inquisitive
right,
and
right,
intellectually
right.
curious. I can tell you that for me, in the latter stages of my career, where it's mostly been a business leader, the most important thing I can do, other than strategy, is to ask that one question.
Yeah,
There's that one
yeah,
question. Sometimes it's a
sure,
couple of them,
sure.
right? But I feel that I've done my job well when I go to a meeting and I ask that one question that gives everyone
Yep.
pause. That's the value I bring. Then let the engineers and the accountants and the salespeople and all the other people in the business then go do their jobs
Hmm.
while they consider that question. So yeah, I think the question mark analogy that I gave you wasn't fully
Okay.
developed because I think there are two types. There's the ones maybe those are the wispy
Yeah.
people that are we'll call clueless, and then the ones that are intellectually
Right.
curious.
Right.
So the consultant that asks that one question that no one else has asked is that's very
Sure.
valuable, I think.
Yep. Yep. All right. So one more question, then we'll get into more later things. As you evolved from a definitely hands-on engineer to more of a manager with an engineering mindset, what gives you satisfaction at the end of the day or at the end of the week? What makes you look back and go, "That was a good day. That was a good week." That sort of thing. And how has that changed, if it's changed?
I formed our company 10 years ago with the desire to, first of all, get out of big company
Yep.
stuff.
I can relate to that.
And yeah, and nothing wrong with big
Yep.
companies, but it wasn't for me
Sure.
anymore. To give people an opportunity to work.
Mm.
There's there's something basic in the human race uh, to work, and you need to have job providers. And I felt the call to be a job creator and a job provider. And that's actually why I put it together. And I also felt that in doing so, I wanted the jobs to be something that made important things,
Hmm.
things that had, and you had some, uh, one of your guests earlier, the tagline was, all products are important. And I don't dispute that. I'm not going to get into that, but I wanted to make sure that our people really felt that what they were making was important, not something that's throwaway or something that wasn't valued by
Right.
society. They're making cool and important
Right.
things. And, and so that's been the objective: give people an opportunity to work and to make important things. And my deepest satisfaction comes from watching people in the company be successful, rise to
Yep.
a challenge, bounce back. We like to give people second chances. Bounce back, learn from a failure, be a learning organization. Failures are good,
Yep.
probably more valuable than
Sometimes.
successes.
Yep.
We want more successes than failures, but the failures bring great value if we learn from them. And I know that's a cliche, but
Yep.
it I see it every
Yep.
day. So what's most energizing to me is when I see people get it and they are in a role that is completely fulfilling, and I see
Yep.
that. I see it. That's
Yep.
energizing to
Cool.
me.
Um, um, I don't know how much you watch the Shark Tank. I watch it on and off, but Kevin O'Leary, I think he might. Your beginning statement where you wanted to make jobs for people. He goes, "No, you don't want to make jobs. You want to make money," or something like that. And that's one of the things about him that I disagree with. I mean, yes, you want to make money, but I think there have been people on the Shark Tank and now Exhibit B, Mr. Doug Tiger, that part of their vocation is to help provide jobs, and there might be people in your position when they see those people grow, they're seeing dollar signs grow. But knowing you, and I think people just who have listened to you for 50 minutes or so now would recognize that is not your primary motivation. You are genuinely appreciating seeing these people grow. And sure, there's a nice benefit that it helps your business. But, and I'm sure there's been more than one case where you've hired somebody, they've grown, and they've grown out of what, excuse me, what your companies can provide, and they've gone somewhere else. And I'm sure you were sad to see them go, but happy for them as individuals.
I draw great pleasure from an employee at one of our factories who came out of the prison system. His brother was an
Yeah,
NBA
you've
champion,
mentioned him. Yep.
and he always liked to claim that he was a better ball player than his
Of
brother.
course he did.
And you have brothers, I have
Yeah.
brothers. We know how
Yep.
that rivalry goes. There's one day he came in and quit. He quit the right way.
Yep.
He gave his notice and he talked about it, and he was being given an opportunity that extended himself in areas that we couldn't offer in our factory. It was really outside of factory
Sure.
work. And he left and has never looked back. And I got to tell you, I love that. I'm so proud of him. I hope to see him again someday.
You haven't connected with
His
him
name's
since then?
Will.
Have you?
He might have stopped by, but
Okay.
I don't think I was in the factory
Okay.
that day. They said Will had stopped
Yep.
by. But I got to tell you, you have to have dollars. You have to, the company has to make
Right.
money or you can't do the
Right.
things you need to do. And there are companies that recognize that their job is to make money. And I'm fully in favor of that mentality. It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Sure.
For me, it is a vocation. You use that word, and I agree. It's a calling, it's a vocation. Somebody has to offer the dignity of work, and we have many employees who appreciate the chances they've been given because they were down and out, maybe out of the prison
Hmm.
system or some other
Yep.
misfortune.
All right. I think that's a good not stopping point, but a good place to change subjects. What besides preparing to spoil your granddaughter? What are you doing for fun these days? What gives you pleasure outside of work?
Yeah, I like to give back.
All right.
Okay, so first of all, I'm a devoted father and
Yep.
husband. I'm married 32 years to Molly, who is just a joyful person and a very patient person. And you have to be, I suppose, to be married to me. So Saint Mary or Saint Molly, let's
Yep.
say. But through while my kids are three daughters and they're grown and gone, but while they were home, I was devoted to them. They were not my hobby. They were come home and drop everything, get on the floor and
Yep.
play with the kids. And even when they were teenagers and didn't do that, have great experiences
Yep.
with them. So to this day, I would say we spend a lot of time trying to interact with
Yep.
them and not parent them, release them,
Right.
but of course you're never not a parent. So but just to enjoy them and their as their lives progress and unfold. So that's number one. It's been number one and it remains number one. I've also, as some people would say, is this fun and relaxing? I've served on some boards that have been very encompassing, nonprofit boards. So I was on a school board for many years. I was on a board that I just cycled off after 13 years that deals with Guatemalan literacy.
Mm.
Been to Guatemala many times, and really just taking what's an outstanding organization and helping them be better was incredibly
Yep.
satisfying. From there, if you go to my house, you won't find the TV on unless there's sports on. Definitely a fan of my
Yep.
teams coming from Western Pennsylvania. That's the Pittsburgh
Yep.
teams, and have changed my perspective on how those teams are and what they're supposed to be in anyone's as entertainment through the years. But absolutely enjoy
Hmm.
that. And then I think right now, beyond that, I've developed some deep and I think meaningful relationships with the men's group at my church.
Oh, good.
Spend time in and out of that, really just sometimes helping each other through tough times and sometimes celebrating achievements and just helping make the church better.
Cool.
I don't get a lot of sleep, Bert.
I know. You're probably looking at Ellie and Vic and jealous of how much sleep they're getting.
they had some. They had a good night the other
So
night.
Ellie and Vic obviously being the new parents. So
Yeah.
all right, very good. So I'm going to put a different twist on this episode. Instead of having the grab bag question, I have for you, Jesus, 10. We're going to go lightning round questions. All right. So are you ready for the lightning round of questions?
I am
All
poised.
right. Poised.
For the listeners, I would only say that this is a long time habit of the two of us. So
All
have at it,
right.
Bert. Let's see
All
what we
right.
can do here.
Favorite beer or other alcoholic beverage?
So my traditional favorite beer would be Iron City beer in Pittsburgh, just because of what it stands for. I do like in general the German Pilsners.
Is it still in a steel can? This is a sub question.
No, no,
That's too
no,
bad.
no, no.
That was a story we didn't get to. All right. Between you and I, who's better at basketball?
You are.
I hadn't thought of that possible answer. Dogs or cat?
In our day, I could ball
Oh
on
yeah,
you
yeah,
anytime, Bert. But
yeah.
Not now. I think you'd beat me now.
Man, not sure. Anyways, dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Whose college alma mater is rated more highly by the Wall Street Journal?
You don't. Your college doesn't exist anymore, so by definition, mine is still. But I think your merged college outranks mine by the Wall Street
which
Journal, if I'm not
which really
mistaken.
surprised me, and it gives me great pleasure.
Although I can throw the Notre Dame because I got my MBA at Notre Dame, so I can throw that card on
Very
you.
good.
I still
Very
got
good.
you
All
there.
right. What is the first car you ever drove?
A 1972 Chevy pickup truck,
Oh, there you go.
yellow.
All right. All right. Who's better at track and field?
You,
All right. Then
not even close.
and now. All right.
Yeah, then and now.
Actually, how many episodes of Beers with Engineers have you downloaded and listened to?
I'm going to say 75%.
75%. How many episodes of Beers with Engineers has your wife downloaded and listened to? I know at least one.
I'm going to say 2.
Two. All right. Manual or automatic transmission?
Absolutely manual,
All right.
but automatic for practicality reasons.
All right. Very good. And Chicago or New York style pizza?
New York.
New York. All right. That does it for my list of lightning round questions. As is my habit on this podcast, I give last question, comment, speech, summary, or whatever to the guest. What do you got for me, Doug?
You know, Bert, I got to tell you, how long have you been doing this?
This episode, when it's released, will be virtually a year to the date from the first episode. Excuse me, first episode
A year
released.
to the date.
I'll fight there.
You know, I got to say, Bert, I got a lot of questions for you. And I don't think I can ask you one question in the remaining few moments.
That we have.
I think from time to time, you and I through the years, whenever one of us accomplishes something, the other one gets to be rewarded. And so I think after a year of doing this, which is great accomplishment, and I really love the podcast, therefore I get a reward.
Okay, so I got to buy you dinner?
Well,
that's the typical reward.
That is. But I think in this case, I would boldly say that it's time for you to be the recipient of the questions and for you to explain to the podcast world who you are. And so my request would be, may I be rewarded by interviewing you.
I think we can make that happen.
On Beers with Engineers.
I have been, it's in my mind to do that eventually. And I guess in this case, there's no good time like the present. And we can have it the 1 year plus one anniversary episode where Bert goes behind the mic or other side of the mic, whichever it is.
Awesome.
All right. Sounds good. We will make that happen.
We'll set that up.
That wraps up this episode. And we will talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Bert. I've enjoyed it.
Jolly good. There you have it, folks. Another episode of Beers with Engineers is in the books. And not only that, we have a teaser for the first time for the next episode, where yours truly, Bert Ushold, will be the guest of this week's guest, Doug Tyger. Thanks again for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe, tell your friends, do all that good stuff about the Beers with Engineers podcast. If you would like to be a guest, please let me know. I'd love to have you on. And thanks again for listening.